I woke up that morning the same way I had for the past 7 months, before the sun, without an alarm, to the sound of my own thoughts buzzing like a trapped insect against glass. Retirement was supposed to be a quiet victory lap, the reward, for decades of loyal work and disciplined living. That's what they all said anyway. But nobody warned me about the stillness. Nobody mentioned that after a lifetime of structuring your hours, your worth might suddenly become a floating question mark. The coffee pot gurgled as I stared out the kitchen window, watching our maple tree sway against the pale sky. My husband sat across from me, scrolling through his tablet with the same bored efficiency he used on financial reports in the 90s. I cleared my throat. I was thinking, I said carefully, maybe I could take some classes or do something new, something useful. He didn't look up. Eliza, he said, his tone flat, you don't need to pretend. You're retired. Just enjoy it. That moment should have passed like steam off a mug, but it didn't. It wasn't until later, standing in the laundry room folding his golf polos, that the word slipped in, rather. He'd been talking on the phone with a friend, laughing about something, and then casually, as if discussing the weather, he said it. Eliza? Oh, she's kind of useless now, just putters around. The sentence fell like a hammer against glass. I stood motionless, a sock clenched in my hand, as the word echoed through my ribs like a gong. Useless. Not tired or adjusting, not even bored. Useless. The cruel finality of it struck me in a way no professional insult ever had. I'd led teams, managed crises, hit every deadline. And now I was, what? A shadow in her own house? That night I didn't mention it. He had no idea I'd heard. He had no idea that a single word had splintered something inside me that would never settle back into place the same way again. I began noticing the small rituals of invisibility after that. The way he thanked the server and never acknowledged me at restaurants. The way family gatherings had started to feel like I was part of the furniture, present but unnoticed. I used to be sharp, essential, the one people came to for answers. Now, even my own husband seemed to forget I was in the room unless he needed something ironed or found. And the most painful part? I had let it happen. I had agreed to step back when he wanted to retire first. I'd reassured him when he felt insecure about me making more than he did in my final years at the firm. I dimmed my own light because I believed that was what a good wife did. And maybe, for a while, I believed it would be reciprocated. But women like me, women who learn to make themselves smaller for the comfort of others, we don't notice how much we've disappeared until someone names it. Until someone calls you useless. The worst part wasn't even the insult. It was the way it aligned with a fear I hadn't admitted out loud. Somewhere deep down, I had started to believe it too. The world stops asking for your input. Your name drops off the email threads. Your phone buzzes less. You begin to measure your days by grocery runs and whether the towels are dry by evening. You wonder if the best parts of you lived in another decade and whether the woman in the mirror is just a friendly stranger keeping your memories company. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the same walls we'd painted together 15 years ago, and I realized that something inside me had quietly died, and no one had noticed. Not even me. But grief can be a strange kind of fertilizer. I didn't know it yet, but something had started to grow in that silence. I began writing things down, not for a business, not yet, but just to hear my own voice again. Thoughts, memories, even old budget templates I remembered from my years in operations. I reorganized the pantry, then the finances, then the whole household. I read articles on small business management, not because I had a plan, but because the language felt familiar, like running into an old friend. I started dreaming in spreadsheets again, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dormant. And dormancy, I realized, is not the same as death. It's a pause before growth. It wasn't until I passed by a local consignment shop one afternoon that the idea truly landed. The storefront was cluttered, the signage outdated, but something about it caught me. A flash of a better layout, a smoother flow, a system begging to be optimized. I went in, struck up a conversation with the owner, and within 5 minutes, I was suggesting inventory management strategies. She asked if I consulted. I laughed. I'm retired, I said. But as I walked away, my heart was racing. For the first time in months, I felt alert, alive. That night, As my husband read the sports section and sipped his scotch, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I named it Phase 2. And somewhere deep inside me, a woman who had once been called useless began sharpening her edges again. The first time I looked at my reflection and truly didn't recognize myself, it wasn't a dramatic moment. No gasping, no broken glass, just a slow, quiet disbelief. I had gone to the bathroom after a restless night, trying to fix a pillow that no longer supported the weight of my thoughts. The mirror above the sink caught me off guard. The woman staring back wore my pajamas, had my eyes, my hair, though a bit duller, more tired, but she wasn't me. Her shoulders slouched, not in fatigue, but in resignation. Her mouth held a default tightness, like someone who had learned to swallow opinions for so long it had reshaped her face. I touched the glass, not out of melodrama, but to check the clarity of what I was seeing. I didn't look older exactly, not in the cliché sense of aging. I looked edited, as if pieces of me had been gently erased over time, until only a trace outline remained. Somewhere along the way, I'd been overwritten by roles: wife, supporter, retiree, none of which felt like choices anymore. I started avoiding mirrors after that, not out of vanity, but out of confusion. I didn't want to keep confronting the absence of myself. Instead, I filled my days with tasks. I alphabetized our spice rack, I repainted the laundry room, I updated our home insurance policy. Useful things. Things that couldn't be dismissed as puttering. My husband barely noticed. He thought I'd found a new domestic rhythm, maybe even felt proud in his quietly patriarchal way. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling and rewiring at the same time. Every drawer I organized felt like a rebellion. Every spreadsheet I updated a silent protest. There was a strange kind of power in competence, even if no one acknowledged it, especially then. And so I kept going, not because I had clarity or purpose, but because the alternative was stagnation, and I'd tasted too much of that already. Late at night, I began writing again. Not fiction, not poetry, just long, tangled documents that blended business plans with therapy. What would a consignment shop need to scale? What would it take to start a digital platform for local artisans? What were the overhead costs of launching a consulting service for women-owned small businesses? Each document was a whisper from the woman I used to be, the one who had managed multi-million-dollar budgets and built operational systems from scratch. I missed her terribly. She was so far away now, tucked behind years of silence and social compromise, but I could still hear her, faintly, and if I followed her voice, I thought, maybe I could find her again. It became my new habit. Every morning, after my husband went to the golf course, I would open my laptop and build something. An idea, a system, a dream. It felt like breathing underwater and realizing, finally, you had gills. One morning, I created a logo. Nothing fancy, just a placeholder for a company that didn't yet exist, but naming it felt like planting a flag. I called it the second act. It sounded like a theater production, which amused me. Because isn't that what women like me are always told? That our lives are staged in acts? Youth, motherhood, retirement, and then the curtain falls? No one talks about the scene change that happens when the audience thinks the play is over. I wasn't sure what the business would become, or even if it would survive outside my hard drive. But the act of naming it made it real. I printed the logo, pinned it above my desk, and stared at it the way I used to stare at my promotion certificates. Proof that I was building something that belonged only to me. The more I worked, the more alive I felt. And the more I began to resent the silence that surrounded me at home. My husband still treated me like background noise. We coexisted in parallel routines, him in front of the TV, me in front of spreadsheets. When I tried to share ideas, he would nod absently, the way one does when being polite to a stranger on a plane. I stopped trying, and as I did, something unexpected happened. I stopped needing his validation. That need, once rooted so deep I couldn't tell where it ended, and started to wither. I began measuring my value not by his comments, but by the strength of my ideas, the clarity of my plans. I was rebuilding a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, and she didn't ask for applause. She just wanted to exist, fully. I still had no income, no clients, No proof that the second act would ever become more than a beautifully formatted file structure on my computer. But for the first time in a long while, I had momentum. And momentum, I've learned, is a kind of oxygen. I started dressing differently, even if I wasn't going anywhere. Crisp blouses, structured pants, pieces that reminded me I wasn't vanishing. I started walking every morning, not for fitness, but for discipline. Every detail became symbolic, every habit a declaration. I wasn't the woman in the mirror anymore. I was someone new, not fully formed, not yet visible to the world, but real, and growing stronger with every quiet act of defiance. I didn't tell anyone, not friends, not family, not even Sophia, my sister-in-law and closest confidant. Partly because I didn't have answers to the questions they'd ask, but mostly because I couldn't bear the possibility of doubt. Doubt was lethal at this stage. I needed belief to incubate in peace, without external voices contaminating it with concern or condescension. My husband thought I was just keeping busy. He'd even chuckle now and then when he saw me typing furiously at the kitchen table, calling it my late-in-life hobby. I let him think that, let him sit smugly in his assumption that I was harmless. There was power in being underestimated, power in building something beneath the surface, like roots spreading quietly through soil, preparing to burst upward when the season was right. I was no longer looking for his approval. I was looking for my life. Every evening, I devoured online courses and small business guides the way I used to study for board meetings. I created a checklist: licensing, branding, social media strategy, financial modeling. I built pitch decks even though I had no one to pitch to, yet. I reviewed case studies of women who started over at 50, 60, even 70, drawing courage from their paths. My notes grew into frameworks, my frameworks into plans, and eventually those plans became a living, breathing blueprint. I didn't know what success would look like, but I knew how to build the infrastructure. That was my language. That was where I had always thrived, in the systems, the logic, the architecture beneath things. And so I treated my idea like it was already real, because in my mind, it was. I had stopped asking for permission to take up space. I was claiming it. The name, The Second Act, began to spread quietly beyond my computer. I printed business cards, minimalist, clean, elegant. I created a website, registered the LLC, and opened a separate bank account. No more hypothetical dreaming. This was execution. I made a list of potential clients, local women-owned businesses that had potential but needed guidance. Structure, strategy. The consignment shop owner who had unknowingly sparked my revival became my first meeting. I offered her a free consultation, which turned into a full month of hands-on support. Inventory systems, marketing plans, customer data tracking, things I used to teach my teams but never thought I'd do solo. At the end of the month, she insisted on paying me. I refused. She paid me anyway. It was a check for $1,000, and I stared at it for an hour before depositing it. Not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Proof that I wasn't delusional. I had value, tangible value. After that, things began to move faster. Word spread. I got 2 more referrals, then 5, then 10. Women who had inherited businesses but didn't know how to run them. Women whose husbands had died or left them holding the reins to something they never asked for. Women like me. I wasn't just consulting. I was translating, helping them see their instincts as legitimate, their intuition as strategy. I created templates, systems, and a newsletter that gained hundreds of subscribers in a month. I spent nights rebranding their businesses and days training them to believe in their own competence. It was the most meaningful work I'd ever done, and none of it bore my husband's fingerprints. It was mine, entirely mine, built with no safety net, no co-signer, no applause. Still, I kept it hidden, not out of shame, but because I wasn't ready to explain the scope of what was happening. It was sacred, this space I had carved out, like a secret garden, and I feared that if I exposed it too early, someone might trample it, even unintentionally. The house remained neutral ground. I still made dinner, still asked about his day, still smiled politely at his complaints about slow tea times or high property taxes. But inside, I was a fortress. Every compliment he gave me now sounded like static. Every dismissive comment, an echo that no longer touched bone. I had evolved beyond his reach, and he didn't even know it. That was the strangest part, not the hiding, but how natural it became, as if I had always been living a double life, and only now remembered who I really was. Then came the moment I hadn't prepared for. A local business journal requested an interview. One of my early clients had submitted my name for a Women Over 50 Entrepreneurs to Watch feature. It was flattering, terrifying. I almost declined. But the younger version of me, the one who used to stand in boardrooms and command attention, she whispered something I hadn't heard in years. Take the seat at the table. I agreed to the interview. We spoke for an hour. I shared my philosophy, my journey, my belief that starting over after 50 wasn't a tragedy. It was a damn privilege. They photographed me in my home office, a space I had carved out of the guest bedroom, complete with my vision board, my spreadsheet-laden cork wall, and my framed logo. When the article went live, I didn't send it to anyone. But within a week, someone else would find it, and the life I had built in secret would no longer stay that way. He found out on a Tuesday. Not because I told him. He never would have heard it from me first, but because someone else at his golf club handed him a copy of the business journal, folded neatly to the center spread. I wasn't there, but I imagined the moment in perfect detail. Him sitting at the outdoor table, scotch in hand, sunglasses perched on his nose, a chuckle from across the table. Hey, Richard, isn't this your wife? He would have taken the paper half interested, probably expecting some community bake sale photo. But then he would have seen my name, Eliza Matthews, followed by the headline, From Retired to CEO, the woman behind the second act. There it was, my face, framed by the shelves of my home office, my story, laid out in full, my success, undeniable. I wasn't there, but I could feel the temperature in that moment shift from mild amusement to something harder to define. Embarrassment? Confusion? Or worse, the gnawing realization that he hadn't seen it coming. He came home later than usual. I was in the kitchen, reviewing a proposal from a new client, an eco-focused artisan collective looking to expand nationwide. When I heard the door, I braced myself. There was a particular kind of silence that always preceded his anger, and this was it. He didn't say hello, didn't ask what was for dinner, just walked straight to the counter and slapped the folded magazine on the surface between us. I didn't flinch. You've been lying to me, he said, his voice low but tight, like a piano wire. Not lying, I replied calmly, just choosing not to explain every detail of my day to someone who's never asked. He blinked, stunned by the audacity. I could see it, his world shifting slightly off axis. For the first time in our marriage, he wasn't the one holding the narrative. I was. You made me look like a fool, he said, pacing now. Everyone at the club saw this. They're all talking about it, about how I had no idea my wife was running a company behind my back. The irony of that sentence nearly made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it revealed everything. This wasn't about betrayal. It was about pride, about control, about the fact that he had spent years assuming I had nothing going on beyond laundry cycles and grocery lists, and now the world had proof otherwise. I let the silence stretch, let the tension do what it needed to do. Then I answered, slow and steady. Maybe if you'd looked up from your tablet once in a while, you wouldn't be the last to know. It was cruel, maybe, but I wasn't sorry. I'd been silent for years. Now my voice had gravity. He sat down heavily at the dining table, the kind of sit that signals defeat but not surrender. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked, genuinely perplexed. Because you don't listen, I said, softer now. You haven't asked me a real question about my life in years. You call me useless. You joke about me puttering around. Why would I share something sacred with someone who doesn't see me? He looked older in that moment, not just in years, but in relevance. Like a relic from another time, unsure how the world had moved without him. I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered every dinner where he cut me off, every party where he introduced me only as his wife and never by name, every time he'd used silence as a weapon and called it peace. No, I didn't owe him anything. The days that followed were strained. He vacillated between sulking and shallow attempts at support. Maybe I could help with the business side, he offered one evening, as if I'd been struggling, as if my success had somehow happened by accident. I declined, politely, firmly. The truth was, I didn't want him involved. The second act wasn't just a company. It was my resurrection, my rebellion, my proof of self. Letting him in would have been like letting the storm that destroyed you help rebuild your house. He didn't understand, probably never would. But he stopped calling me useless. And for the first time in our marriage, he looked at me like I was something to be taken seriously. That recognition came too late to repair what had been lost, but not too late to satisfy the part of me that had once begged for it. What surprised me most, though, was how little his reaction ultimately mattered. I'd spent so many years craving his validation, believing that his approval would be the final stamp of legitimacy. But now that it had arrived, late, reluctant, hollow, I realized I didn't need it at all. The applause I wanted had come from clients who thanked me for saving their businesses, from women who emailed to say they finally believed they could start over too, from my own reflection when I passed the mirror and saw not a stranger but a builder, a survivor, a creator. He could sulk, he could stew, he could retreat into his bruised ego. I had work to do, and I had a company to run. It didn't happen with confetti or champagne. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no Instagrammable moment. The $1 million milestone arrived on a Tuesday morning, quietly, like most victories that are built from bone-deep grit. I was reviewing quarterly reports when the email came in from my accountant. Subject line, "Congratulations." I opened it slowly, bracing for a disclaimer. But there it was, clean and indisputable. Our total revenue had crossed 7 figures. I stared at the number, not quite feeling the triumph the world assumes should follow such news. Instead, I felt still, deeply, profoundly still, as if something had finally landed inside me after a long, turbulent flight. Not joy, not relief, something sturdier, completion. I had done it, not to prove something, not to get back at anyone, but because I could. I sat there in the silence of my home office, the same room that used to be a guest bedroom, surrounded by the visible architecture of a life I had rebuilt from scratch. Vision boards, handwritten affirmations, books with dog-eared pages, sticky notes with clients' names and goals. The map of everything I'd once believed was gone forever. I thought back to the woman I was the day he called me useless, the unfolding golf shirts in a quiet house, too stunned by a single word to speak. That woman had felt like dust, but dust, I've learned, is where stars are born. I had risen not because someone invited me to, but because I built my own table, pulled up my own chair, and dared to speak even when no one was listening, especially then. I didn't tell my husband right away, not because I feared his reaction, but because it wasn't his moment. This one belonged to me, and every version of me who had been told she was too old, too late, too lost. Instead, I called my very first client, the woman from the consignment shop who had unknowingly reignited my fire, and told her the news. We laughed, we cried, we promised to celebrate in person. Then I called 3 more women, former clients, now friends. Their reactions were visceral, emotional, unfiltered, because they knew what this meant. Not the money, but the message, that we weren't done. That reinvention isn't a myth, it's a muscle, and we were flexing it in plain sight. Eventually, he found out, not through me, but through the same business journal that had once ambushed him at the golf club. This time, it was a profile piece, how the second act became a $1 million movement. He brought the magazine home and left it on the counter without a word. No tantrum, no questions, just silence, the kind that carries both defeat and awe. I didn't break it. I didn't need to. We were no longer adversaries. We were something. More distant, less charged, witnesses to each other's stories. His, rooted in tradition and control. Mine, in rebellion and reawakening. He didn't apologize. He never would. But the way he cleared the dinner table that night without being asked said more than he realized. For the first time, maybe ever, he saw me. Not as a wife or a housekeeper or a function, but as a force. People ask me now what it feels like, crossing the $1 million mark, becoming a case study, receiving speaking invitations. And I tell them the truth. It feels like coming home to yourself after a long, punishing exile. It feels like walking into a room where you were once invisible and realizing your voice is the loudest one there. But more than anything, it feels like peace. Not the kind that's given by others, but the kind you earn by burning down every lie you were taught about your limitations. It's not about the money. The money is a byproduct. The real wealth is the freedom, the clarity, the unshakable knowledge that no one gets to decide your value but you. I still run the second act, now with a team, an office downtown, and clients in 3 countries. But my favorite days are the quiet ones. Mornings when I sit by the window, coffee in hand, and remember the life I almost settled for. The woman I almost allowed to disappear. She visits sometimes, not as a ghost, but as a reminder of how far I've come and how close I came to not coming back at all. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd build something like this, I would have smiled politely and changed the subject, because I didn't see it either, not fully, but now I do. And I want every woman reading this to know it's never too late to become the most powerful version of yourself. All it takes is one voice, yours.